Hello, and welcome to a Rodent's Guide on the Phobos Strike Team in Kill Team 2024. This video will serve as a general introduction to the Phobos Strike Team, as well as a specialist video for those that have played the team before. There will be timestamps in the description below to help you navigate this guide. My name is Mouse. Let's get into the video. The Phobos Strike Team has the same compositional options that it did in KT 2021. It's a 6-model elite team with 3 major operative categories. Those categories being Infiltrators, Incursors, and Reavers, which we will discuss momentarily. These 6 models require 1 Sergeant to lead the squad, but can otherwise consist of whatever combination of operatives you want for a game. This flexibility is one of the biggest strengths of the Phobos team, so let's take a look at those operative categories and what makes up those groups. Each operative category comes with their own faction rules. All Infiltrators contribute to your Omni Scrambler ability, which allows you to perform a free strategic gambit each turn to delay enemy actions. Specifically, any friendly Infiltrators can select a visible target at the beginning of the turning point, and your opponent cannot activate them until they have activated a number of other operatives equal to the number of surviving Infiltrators that you have at the time. This is a useful ability that makes Infiltrators quite useful to have in your list. All Incursors are equipped with a multi-spectrum array, which allows them to ignore the obscuring rules when shooting at enemy operatives. This can be map dependent, but it can definitely allow for deceptively strong shooting when an opponent thinks their operatives are protected. Finally, all Reavers have the Terror rule, which makes it harder for enemy operatives to contest objectives and perform mission actions if they are within 3 inches of a Reaver operative. This, combined with the fact that Reavers are often on the front lines of the battle, makes it useful for locking down objectives and ensuring reliable scoring. Also of note is that the operatives on the Phobos team are Astartes, meaning that they can either fight twice or shoot twice as long as they select a bolt weapon for at least one of those shooting attacks. This is an upgrade from KT21 where the Phobos team had to pay for this with command points, which now makes them on par with other elite teams in this regard. All Phobos operatives can also counteract regardless of their order, so don't forget that they aren't necessarily finished when they've been expended. Let's now talk about the operative options for the Phobos Strike Team. There are 3 leader options for this team, so let's go through each one by one. The general stat line for the leader of this team is a 3 APL unit with a 7-inch move, saving on 3+, and a total of 13 wounds. For shooting, they're all 4 attacks, hitting on 3s with 3/4 damage. All leaders also have the Tactical Advantage ability, which has 2 points. The first bullet allows you to re-roll your initiative once per game, but can only be used if this operative is still alive at the time. This can be sometimes a very useful tempo shift, so don't forget about it. The second bullet point allows you to use a Firefight ploy for 0 CP if it is targeting your leader, or the Patient Ambush ploy for 0 CP if your leader is readied and not in engagement range of enemy operatives. This is another niche but useful set of tools, so don't forget about them while your leader is still alive. It's hard to argue with getting resources for free. The Infiltrator Sergeant upgrades the standard leader chassis by adding lethal 5+ to their shooting and being another model that can use the Omni Scrambler ability. Looking at the next leader option, the Incursor leader upgrades the standard leader by adding Saturate to their shooting and gaining the multi-spectrum array to ignore obscuring. I personally think this is the weakest leader option, but some boards make it a tempting choice. The final leader is the Reaver Sergeant, who has several potential changes from the basic leader profile. Most commonly, this model is outfitted with a special issue bolt pistol and combat knife, which limits their range to 6 inches but gives them piercing 1 on all other shots. They also get an upgraded melee profile of 5 attacks hitting on 3s with 4/5 damage, which can really pack a punch when combined with some of their other ploy options. On top of that, they always benefit from Terror, and they have the Grab, Shoot, and Grapnel launcher abilities as well. This enables them to always treat climbs as 2 inches, and they ignore all drop distances when moving, which gives a ton of movement options around the board. It is very common for this operative to get places your opponent doesn't anticipate, and does so very quickly. In general, this is my default leader option, and I would highly encourage other Phobos players to do the same. Now, let's look at the Infiltrator options available for the team. First up is the Commsman, with a standard Infiltrator profile and 2 unique abilities. The first ability, Strategic Oversight, says that at the beginning of every turning point, if this operative is still alive and not within engagement range of enemy operatives, roll 1d6 and you gain an additional command point if the result is 4 or greater. The second ability, Comms Array, allows you to change one strategy ploy that you have in effect to another one at no cost. This ability can only be used once per turning point, and can only be used if the commsman is still alive at the time. Both of these abilities add some resource management increases to the team, but I find that there are rarely instances where I have multiple strategic ploys that I want to have active, since the Phobos don't have amazing options. I'll talk more on this when we discuss ploys later on. The next infiltrator is the Helix Adept, who functions as this team's medic and support role. Again, this operative has the standard infiltrator profile and 2 unique abilities. The medic ability has a lot of text, but basically allows this operative to prevent another friendly operative from dying as a result of a shooting attack. Instead of removing that operative, they survive with 1 wound remaining, no matter how much damage they took from that shooting attack. The revive operative then can take an optional dash immediately, but if it does so, they have to end their dash with an engagement range of the Helix Adept. Both the Helix Adept and the revived operative then suffer -1 APL until the end of their next activation, and this medic ability can only be used if the Helix Adept is alive at the time and within 3 inches of the target. The second ability for the Helix Adept, called Helix Gauntlet, allows this operative to perform an action for 1 AP to heal a friendly operative in engagement range for D3 plus 3 lost wounds. Importantly, however, this ability cannot be used on an operative that was revived from their medic ability in the same turning point, and it cannot be used if the Helix Adept is within engagement range of enemy operatives. The Saboteur is the only operative on the Phobos list that can deal out area of effect damage, so they get special attention in certain matchups. This operative has the standard infiltrator profile, but they gain an additional weapon option in the form of their remote detonator. This new weapon is 4 attacks, hitting on 2s with 5/6 damage, dash only, piercing 1, and silent. The setup for this weapon, however, has some hoops to jump through. The Saboteur has to place their explosive marker as an action, after which they can perform a free dash action. Just remember that this remote detonator can only be used when the operative has not performed the reposition or charge action, which can make it decently telegraphed to your opponent. This explosive packs a real punch and can punch through multiple enemies in the explosion, but it can be hard to position correctly if your opponent is aware of it, even though this is a 3 APL operative. Next up is the Infiltrator Veteran. I don't love this operative because the only thing that they bring to the table is their custom keyword for their bolter carbine. This keyword allows you to select 2 weapon keywords when you choose this model for the team. The available options are Balanced, Lethal 5+, Piercing Crits 1, Rending, and Saturate. I usually take Balanced and Lethal 5 up to ensure that this is the most reliable damage output, but I feel like this operative doesn't have enough unique flavor to justify taking them over some of the other operative options. The final infiltrator option for the Phobos team is the Voxbreaker, who acts as another utility piece for the team. A standard infiltrator profile, this operative comes with 2 abilities. The first, Voxbreak, prevents your opponents from re-rolling any dice on attack or defense if they are within 6 inches of this operative at the time. The second, a 1 AP action called Auspex Scan, grants a buff to your operatives if they are shooting against an enemy operative within 8 inches of this operative. If they are, the enemy cannot be obscured, and if the friendly operatives performing the shot are incursors, they gain the Seek Light keyword as well. This ability lasts until Voxbreak's next activation, or until it is incapacitated, whichever comes first. This operative is a situational take in the list, but it can be very impactful if your opponent's team relies on re-rolling their dice for consistency, or if the board has a lot of obscuring/light terrain. In the latter cases, it might be worth tailoring some of your list around this operative's support to remove obscuring or provide Seek Light, depending on what it is that you'd be bringing to do so. Here is a quick snapshot of the basic Infiltrator Warrior operative. Note here that although Vanguard is no longer a ploy for the Phobos team, the Warrior operatives have it as an ability on their data cards. This new ability allows for 1 friendly Phobos Warrior to perform a pickup marker or mission action for free once per turning point. This is some useful utility and will come up later, but for now, let's move on. Now let's look at the Incursor operatives. Arguably the most impactful operative on the team, the Incursor Marksman. This operative has an upgraded shooting profile so that they have 4 attacks hitting on 2s with 3/4 damage alongside Lethal 5 up and Piercing 1. This unit reliably puts out heavy damage combined with their ability to shoot twice, Plus, they have good board control with their track target ability. For 1 AP, this operative can perform the guard action in any kill zone, allowing it to interrupt your opponent's activations with a shoot or fight action of their own. This means that no operative will ever get the drop on this unit unless you allow it to happen, and it also means that you can exert pressure across the map just by threatening to use this operative. Importantly, you can use this ability while on a conceal order, meaning that your opponent often doesn't get the chance to respond to this pressure unless you let them by switching to engage and shooting a worthwhile target. This operative should be pretty much included in every Phobos list and is an auto take. The second Incursor specialist is the Mine Layer operative, who brings an interesting area denial option for the Phobos team. They have the standard Incursor shooting profile, but their importance comes from their Haywire Mine ability. They're carrying a proximity mine that will passively detonate the first time that it comes into the engagement range of any other operative. This detonation removes 1 APL from the target until the start of their next activation, deals 2d3 plus 3 damage automatically, and if it doesn't kill the target, that operative's action immediately ends, and it must be placed at the edge of the mine token. Importantly, this operative is not affected by their own mine token, but it will affect friendly operatives, so place it wisely. Also, if this operative is incapacitated, they drop their mine for free unless there's not a place for them to set it down. Depending on the enemy team and the mission, this operative is nearly an auto take for me as well because of the area denial and protection that they can bring to the squad. Again, here is the standard warrior operative data card. Worthwhile noting that they also benefit from the Vanguard ability and the multi-spectrum array that all Incursors get. The final operative option for the Phobos Strike Team is the Reaver Warrior, who, like the Reaver Sergeant, can be outfitted with 2 different loadouts. Also like the Sergeant, the standard build for these Reavers is the special issue bolt pistol and the combat knife to maximize their lethal close range proximity. They can capitalize on their close range prowess thanks to their grab shoots and their grapnel launchers, which enable them to pass over terrain at reduced cost, and then they get close and personal with enemy operatives. With the Reaver Warriors also gaining Vanguard, they are lightning quick at closing gaps to the opponent, striking enemies down, and securing objectives for the Phobos team. With the operatives in the back of our mind, we can now take a look at the strategic and firefight ploys that the team has available. Guerrilla Warfare is a ploy that used to be a default ability on all Phobos operatives in KT21, but now we have to pay a command point for it. There will be times where this is useful, but I often find myself running out of actions and leaving this one out. In general, I'd prefer to position in a way that keeps me from getting shot, or using a smoke grenade to keep the return fire to a minimum. This is a niche ability that allows you to shift into conceal when it's relevant, but we won't be using it all the time. With a great name, and They Shall Know No Fear, lets you ignore any stat changes to friendly operatives as a result of being injured. Critically, this still means that your operatives can be debuffed in other ways, but this can be a really important tool to keep your operatives at full fighting strength when they start taking damage. It's possible to need this in Turning Point 2, and likely to need it in Turning Point 3. Deadly Shots gets a slight glow up from KT21, but it is situational and can be hard to use if your opponent is playing really cagey. Whenever your opponents are shooting, if they haven't performed the reposition, charge, or fallback actions, they have the balanced weaponry. You can still dash and shoot, but oftentimes it'll be hard to find your opponents already in a vulnerable spot to you, and then shooting them. Also of note is that you can perform these restricted actions after the shooting, but the difficulty in finding those shots still stands. It can add some nice reliability to the Phobos shooting, since each shooting action is probably dropping 1 shot each time anyway, but sometimes this ploy feels like it's just too hard to activate. Lethal Assaults is a bread and butter ploy for you if you have Reavers in your list. This ploy gives all of your operatives balanced in melee, with the added benefit of giving them lethal 5-up if they charged during that activation. If you have Reavers still alive and expect them to be getting their hands dirty, this should pretty much be always used at the start from Turning Point 2 onward. Moving into the Firefight ploys, Patient Ambush allows you to skip an activation for a command point, forcing your opponent to go again immediately. In some matchups, this won't matter at all because you're so far out activated that one more activation from your opponent isn't going to matter, but in other matchups and scenarios, this can force your opponent to commit to something while you still have the chance to respond. It can prevent an opponent from springing a trap, make them telegraph a play, or waste an important resource for the turn. This is especially nice to use when your leader operative makes it cost 0 CP once per game. Critical Shot allows you to deal an extra D3 damage to a target when you resolve a successful critical success against them in a shooting attack with a bolt weapon. Because all of our operatives use bolt weapons, this just means that you can't apply it to grenades. The 3-4 damage breakpoints from bolt weapons sometimes leave us in awkward spots where an enemy operative survives with 1 or 2 wounds remaining. This ploy solves that problem without having to spend a whole other action to shoot them again, which can really help with preserving our action economy. Transhuman Physiology is the same ploy that it was in KT-21, basically allowing us to upgrade a normal defensive save into a critical save for 1 command point. This isn't an awesome defensive trick, but it does come in handy on occasion, and it's the only defensive ploy that we have access to. Stealth Assault is a situational ploy that can be used with great effect once you get used to the required setup. You activate a friendly operative with a conceal order and change it to engage, then perform the charge and fight actions without doing anything else. If you do that, you can then use this ploy as you're resolving the first attack die to immediately be able to resolve a second attack die before your opponent can respond. This 1-2 punch can often incapacitate your opponent's operatives before they can deal any chip damage back to you, thus preserving the health of your operative and making your opponent commit more resources to bringing them down. It can be awkward to execute, but with practice you'll get used to it. Just remember that you have to start on conceal for it to work, which means it gets harder to use as the game goes on and your operatives wind up with engage orders. Unless, of course, you're switching them back with guerrilla warfare. Let's now talk about some strengths and weaknesses. The Phobos Strike Team plays similarly to how it did before in KT-21, but since the game is slowed down a lot, the team can feel pretty different. Losing the Vanguard strategic ploy and no longer being able to score primary points in Turning Point 1 means that the Phobos team now doesn't benefit as much from the lightning-quick openings to the game. Instead, they often find themselves doing that after a turn of staging and positioning for their assaults in Turning Points 2 and 3. This change initially seems minor, but it means that there's a lot more of a burden on the Phobos players to appropriately set up their ambushes and counteroffensives than there used to be. Good strategic planning can be very rewarding for the player, but if operatives are mispositioned, it can be difficult to get that train back on the rails due to a lack of defensive abilities and just general survivability for the squad. The Phobos Strike Team has the ability to play for all 3 points categories in the game right now: the crit op, the tac op, and the kill op, which is great flexibility that allows players to choose where to leverage their strengths. Their play patterns can vary wildly depending on their opponent's team, so experiencing all kinds of matchups, missions, and board layouts will always keep a Phobos player learning something new. Not all of these matchups feel good, such as fighting into other elite teams, since the Phobos team doesn't have any way to mitigate damage or reduce the piercing keyword, but against mid-range or horde teams, they can leverage their elite profiles and often get positive trades, all while still accumulating points from their tac op and their crit op. Understanding when to push the gas and when to push the brakes are critical to the success of a Phobos player. Here are a couple tips and tricks that I've picked up from playing the team. The first thing to get comfortable with for the Phobos Strike Team is the array of options that you have regarding team selection. You can have a standard roster that you take as default, but you will likely need to make several modifications to that list depending on what happens when you walk up to a table. Does your opponent want to shoot you off the board? Maybe lean into more infiltrators so you can win those firefights. Does the board have a lot of obscuring terrain, like on Chalmath? Maybe consider taking at least 2 incursors to leverage that advantage. Does the opposing team have operatives with 9 or fewer wounds? Thinking about loading up on Reavers might be a good idea. This team has a lot more of a toolbox feel than you might expect at a first glance. With the loss of Vanguard as a ploy and having the ability to double shoot baked into all of our profiles, the Phobos Strike Team rarely needs to spend any command points in the first turn. We can be command point hungry though, so make sure you're budgeting your resources and planning out what to spend for at the beginning of each turn. It is easy to get ahead of yourself and use all your buffs early, but you want to make sure that they get used when and where they're actually going to be helpful. The combination of Lethal Assault's strategy ploy and the Stealth Assault Firefight ploy is the reason why I think loading up on Reavers is a viable strategy for the Phobos team. This pair of buffs, combined with the fact that Reavers get 5 attack dice in melee and have increased reliability with Purity Seals as equipment, means that a single Reaver can collapse an entire board flank by itself if the setup is right. With their hypermobility, they can charge into 2 operatives, kill one before taking any damage back, fight the second one, come out ahead, and then still perform a mission action for free because they're a warrior operative and they have the Vanguard ability. Follow all that up with liberal use of smoke grenades, and you can really put your opponent on the back foot if you threaten this option on multiple spots across the table. I personally try to always take at least one infiltrator in a game to ensure that I have access to their Omni Scramble ability. Positioning this infiltrator correctly so that they can scramble key operatives at the start of the second turning point has won me many games all on its own. It can act as an insurance policy for you no matter how the roll of the initiative plays out, so if you lose the initiative, you scramble the play that you're most afraid of from your opponent, and if you win the initiative, you scramble whatever play you aren't going to deal with immediately when the turning point starts. Okay, now let's talk about some pitfalls the team can succumb to. The Phobos team is firmly in the elite category, and only having 6 operatives means that you are often out-activated by your opponent. Know this, understand this, come to terms with this. In nearly all matchups, you're going to have to set up your game plan first, and your opponent will have the opportunity to respond and counter. You'll need to roughly anticipate their responses to prevent them from completely outplaying you, which can be hard to do. Phobos shooting is pretty good, with the base profile being 4 dice hitting on 3s, but the bolter profile of 3-4 damage often means that you'll need to spend 2 shooting actions to put down a target. Infiltrator options help with this with their lethal 5 keyword, and Reavers help with their default piercing 1, but sometimes the firepower from our operatives isn't as impactful as we'd like. Thankfully, we can shoot twice all the same, but there will be times where you'll be wanting to spend that action to do something else instead. This team doesn't have very good access to rerolls on their dice, which means that sometimes you'll want to spend command points to get that important conversion or breakpoint. Just remember to keep track of what you were saving those command points for, since this is a command point hungry team, and you don't want to burn a command point on a reroll when you had a reason that you were keeping it. Sometimes game plans need to change, just make sure you know what you're trading it for. In KT24, the Phobos Strike Team are a team that rewards practice and experience. I highly recommend experimenting with this team and using their flexibility to solve the problems presented by each game that you play. It can feel great to figure out a good solution to a problem when it arises, but it can also feel equally bad to find yourself in a scenario where you just don't have the right answers in the right spots. Players will enjoy taking the Phobos team when they want to play an elite team that isn't a force with unstoppable killing machines, but rather a team of super soldiers who all have to use skill and precision to overcome their opponent. This team was my favorite KT21 team, and it remains a complete blast to play in KT24. That'll wrap up our introduction to the Phobos Strike Team in KT24. If you've made it this far into the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss out on our other guide videos as well. I know the Phobos team is a popular one, so if you have any tricks that you like to use, please leave them in the comments section so that members of our community can try them out as well. More guides like this are coming soon, so stay tuned and let me hear your requests. Until next time, have fun and be good if you want to.